Hello A&M students, this is Teresa Young. Thank you for taking time from your schedule to watch this video about how to conduct and write a critique of a research journal article. First of all, I want to talk for just a moment about why it's important for you to be able to critique an article. There's a lot of research articles that are published in journals today that may or may not work with the families that you are dealing with in your practice. So it's very important for you to be able to evaluate these articles in order for you to select the appropriate intervention for the child or family or individual that you're working with. So let's take a recent article that you were assigned to read in class, and let's go through that article. The article that we're going to be talking about today is the one written by Selwood, Witkowski, Terrier, and Barronclaw concerning the needs-based cognitive behavioral family intervention for patients suffering from schizophrenia, a 5-year follow-up of a randomized controlled effectiveness trial. Now, when you are critiquing an article, the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to read the article through once thoroughly. Then you're going to want to go back and break it down into the parts to look at whether or not the methods that the researcher used are consistent with the results that were reported in terms of the intervention's effectiveness. I will tell you that most critiques that you write, including the writing assignment that you have for this class, involve critiquing articles that used scientific methods such as experimental, quasi-experimental, survey type research designs. You're probably not going to be writing a critique about a qualitative study, because qualitative studies generally do not provide information that can generalize. What you are looking for here is the validity of the study. Sometimes you hear the term validity used in terms of the measurement instrument, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the overall validity of the study and the measures or the methods used by the researcher to ensure that the study was protected from bias. I want to tell you right now that there are no perfect studies, just like there are no perfect interventions. So all studies that you read are going to have certain limitations. And what you want to see in the research articles that you read is whether or not the researcher writes about and identifies these limitations, in their paper. So let's go through this particular article and let's talk about the different parts that we see. When you're writing your paper, you're going to want to include a brief summary of the study itself. And you can find that up front in the abstract provided by the researchers, because that's what an abstract does. That's why the papers that you write in class, I usually don't ask for an abstract, because they don't involve a scientific study that was conducted. They're usually descriptive studies that you're writing about a particular topic. However, in the research journal articles that you're going to be including in your paper, you are going to, have abstracts. And these abstracts kind of give you a snapshot of what you're going to find if you read the entire article. So here is where you can find the purpose of the article. Please remember when you write your paper that you include the purpose of the research study, the intervention that was being studied, the methods that were used by the researchers, and a brief summary of the findings about whether or not the results they found were significant. And if they were significant, for what population or for what sample were they significant. So you can find an overview of all that within the abstract. So be sure when you write your paper that you include a summary of the study itself, including the purpose, methods, results, and the limitations that the researchers found. Now, as you're going through the paper in order to critique it, one of the first things that you're going to look at, you're going to find the introduction, which kind of gives you, sometimes authors will combine the introduction and the literature review. Sometimes you'll find the literature is written separately. In this case, the researcher included some references to previous research, but they didn't really conduct a literature review. Usually the literature review, at the end of that, the author will say something up to the effect of, he'll state the hypotheses for the study, and he'll state, or he will state a research question. When you write your critique of the article, you need to say whether or not the researchers clearly identified a hypothesis for the study or a research question, because again, that tells you what they were looking for, and are they looking for the same things that you need to know in order to evaluate that intervention as a service for the families that you're working with. So we want to be sure that the researcher is clear about the purpose, the research question, or the research hypothesis. The next thing that you're going to want to look at and that you're going to want to include when you write about are the methods that the researcher used to conduct the study. In this particular case, the researcher used a randomized controlled study group. And as we talked about last semester in class, randomized controlled trials are the gold standard for experimental research, because the results that they provide are considered to be the more reliable ones and the ones that can generalize to other populations. We know, though, that there are drawbacks with that, and it comes in the form of limited sample size, such as the case in this particular study. The researchers began with 30 subjects, which they randomly assigned to one of two groups, the experimental group and the control group. Now, one of the strengths of the study is, of course, because they used a randomized control design to conduct the study. So that's a real positive here. One of the drawbacks of the study was that this was a longitudinal study, which meant they looked at the results for these two groups over time, in this case 5 years. So naturally, what's going to happen during that time is that the study is going to experience something called attrition, which means that some of the study subjects dropped out of the group. In fact, remember now we have two groups, so there's only 30 of these families that received the intervention. So of those two groups, the authors report that I believe it was 8 dropped from one group and 9 dropped from the other group. So that left you with approximately 20 participants in each one of the study groups. So again, when you're looking at the results of this particular study as you would other studies, when you're looking at a very small sample size, you're going to need to question whether or not this would be something that would work for your particular clients. Another thing that you're going to want to look at is, in terms of the sample, is how that sample was recruited. In this particular case, were these, I wasn't very sure, where these, study participants came from. but they may have said, and I just may have missed that. But you need to look at whether or not the sample was from the general population or whether or not it was, from a control group that included like maybe only one particular race, one particular socioeconomic group. Uh, Frequently, you'll see studies that are conducted by students who use other students in their study. They may use educational programs that are housed on university campus. So you may not get a representative sample of what that general population is. So you're going to want to see whether or not the researcher actually describes the demographics, of the study participants, and if there is it appears that it's a well-representative sample, you can simply say that. Or you might want to point out that there was no Hispanics or no African Americans included in the study. So you might want to be cautious about using that, depending upon what the intervention is with that particular population. So again, how the subjects were, recruited, who the subjects are, and how many of them is very important, to critiquing any research study. For this particular study, the researcher, when looking at the analysis, and although in the paper that you write for our class, discussing the analysis isn't required. You all have not had an intensive in statistics class, to my knowledge, about knowing whether or not the analysis was appropriately conducted. They in a research article, they should talk about the analysis, and they should present some graphics, some visual representation of what those results look like. One of my complaints with this particular study was that they presented you with a whole page of their results, but they didn't really interpret fully, what those results meant. So you're going to want to, be sure that when you read these, the articles that you use, that are you able to understand the results of the analysis as the researcher reported them. Research should be, sometimes results are, whenever researchers report these results, they'll report several different, numbers that you'll see. Usually what you're wanting to look at is significance level, and I will tell you that, significance is usually reported at the 0.05 level, which means that the researchers are willing to accept a margin of error of 5%. So that's just kind of a standard number that you're probably going to see in a lot of the social service type research. If you're reading medical research, sometimes because their research involves life or death type decisions, and usually pharmaceutical research, they use the 0.01 level, which is, of course, a very narrow margin of error, which is what you would want, if someone's, administering drugs to somebody. So occasionally you'll see that, but in our type of research, you'll see the 0.05. But what you're interested in is whether or not the results were significant, for their findings. Most of the time, you are going to find research articles where the results are reported as significant. Most journals will not publish research studies where the results were not significant. I've had that experience myself. I've had a rejection for that very reason, that they did not find my results significant or interesting. And that's a whole other story that I'll save for class. But again, you're going to be looking at the significant levels. After there, usually, you will rely upon the results reported in a summary section at the end of the article. Now, this particular article is a little bit different from most of the ones that you're going to be reading that are published in journals that are found here in the United States, because this journal was obviously from Scandinavia. So perhaps their editor, wanted the journal article in a different format. So it doesn't follow our usual, format for, breaking down the methods section into, sample or, participants, or procedures followed, or analysis or results. But you're usually going to find that in your methods section, and then there's going to be an overall summary, of the results of the study. And usually it's in that summary where we expect the information to be presented in a way that is understandable for most practitioners to be able to read and interpret those results to know whether or not it would be a workable intervention with their particular families. So again, when you're looking at your particular studies that you're writing, let me take just a minute and let me summarize what you're looking for there. You want to write a brief summary that includes the purpose, of the study, the methods used, and the findings. You're going to want to talk about the sample, how many there were, where they came from, what their demographics were, if that was significant. You're going to want to talk about any efforts that the strengths of the study that you found. And strengths of the study would be what the researchers used to address factors that could affect or offer threats to the internal validity of the study, the ability to replicate the study with other populations. And so some of that might be attrition or people dropping out, and one way that researchers often address that issue is to offer incentives for participants to stay in the study. Another thing that you're going to want to look at is the measurement instrument. Was the same instrument used with all the study participants? Were the people administering the intervention, were they trained in a particular manner? Anything that supports the validity that you think makes it a stronger study, then I want you to talk about that. Again, you're going to be critiquing 3 articles. If some of the articles are similar or have similar traits, feel free to discuss them and compare them, with each other, and to say, well, all 3 articles used extremely small samples recruited from particular populations that might, indicate that it would not work with, adolescents. Let's say you have an intervention and it's being, tested just on adolescents. Would you want to use that intervention if you were working with a family that involved younger children? It's just something to think about. But the purpose of the critique is learning how to analyze the article and take it apart and to find out what's wrong with it, figure out what's wrong with it. Or what's right with it, what you really liked about it. And that brings me to one of the things that should be included in your critique, and that is a paragraph about what you found to be the strengths of the study, what you found to be the implications of the study, what you liked about the study, and why you liked it. I really want you to use your critical thinking here and tell me what you think about it and why you think this would be a good technique to use with a family, or why it might work with one family and not another family. I really want you to I want to hear your thoughts, and opinions about those aspects of the study, the things that meant something to you, that really stood out to you in terms of strengths and needs of the study. So that's just kind of a brief overview of what a research article critique looks like. I hope that this was helpful to you. I would ask that you look at your rubric that is in your course content at the A&M, my A&MU, my AAMU website. Uh, Look at that. Check the link that I upload to the example of a research critique. I think that will help you, give you a visual idea of what we're talking about here. I'll caution you with the one that I'm going to upload. They talk a lot about analysis. And again, you'll probably be talking more about literature review than they talk about analysis. So again, analysis is not a required piece for the part that for the assignment that you're going to be doing in our class up at UNA. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions or concerns about it. I also encourage you to post a message in the discussion board, because you may have a question that would be helpful for other students to know, or somebody else may be wondering about that as well. So again, thank you for taking time to watch the video, and I look forward to seeing you in class.